Good morning and welcome. It's so good to be with you today. Thank you so much for joining us here at New Day Church. We're in a series I'm calling FACETIME, where we are looking at 5 individuals who had these up-close and face-to-face encounters with Jesus. And if you were here last week, you remember the series is not just about those 5 personalities, it's also about us. It's about seeing ourselves through the mirror of their lives and their experiences. And today, we're going to look at a very encouraging story about a woman who had all sorts of problems, who unexpectedly meets Jesus face to face. It's one of the most fascinating and beautiful stories really in all the Bible. Let me begin with this question. Have you ever had the feeling that someone was looking at you, or even worse, talking about you? Like that little group in the hallway at school huddling up near your locker, or that small cluster of people gathered around the coffee pot at work. And you know how it is, you walk up and all the conversation stops and everybody kind of looks around and you can tell by their demeanor and by their glances, yep, they were talking about me. Awkward, isn't it? And actually it's more than awkward, it's a horrible feeling to think that people are talking about you and behind your back. And of course some of that can be personal insecurity, can be paranoia, I get that. It's like the one man who wouldn't go to football games because he just knew that when the team got in the huddle on the field, they were talking about him. But other times it's very real, isn't it? And often too real. Now today in our FaceTime series, we're looking at an up-close and personal encounter that Jesus had with a woman who walked to a well in the heat of the day, carrying an empty bucket to fill with water. And not just any woman, by the way, but a woman who had a rather sordid past and a sullied reputation. The kind of woman that unfortunately causes people to huddle up and talk. And with every footprint that she left in the dirt that day, we will see in this story she was carrying with her the emptiness of life. A life where she felt unknown and unworthy. A life that was unfulfilled for her. Now listen to these words from the story. They're written by one of Jesus' closest friends, a man named John. In chapter 4, verse 3, he says this, "So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about noon." Now watch this. Shortly after beginning his public ministry, Jesus decides to head to the region of Galilee. That's up in northern Israel if you've been over there before. But interestingly, John tells us he had to go through Samaria. Now I want you to, don't miss this. Jesus didn't have to go through Samaria in the physical sense, no. There were other ways to get to Galilee. Most all Jews in this day would have GPSed themselves over the Jordan River and up the east side over there so that they could avoid Samaria entirely. It would be like this. It would be like us in Florida going to New Orleans. But we didn't want to go through Alabama because they always beat us in football. So we'd go up to Georgia, and then we'd go across to Tennessee and to Arkansas and then down to New Orleans. Does that make sense? In other words, these people John's talking about, they would have literally turned a 2 or 3 day trip into a 6 or 7 day trip just because the thought of interacting with people in Samaria was to them unthinkable. You see, these two races, the Jews and the Samaritans, had bad history together. Samaritans were a people that had Jewish background and they had intermarried with other nations, so they became a mixed race. And the Jews considered them to be inferior. They were second class at best. So rather than travel through that region, the Jews would do anything they could to avoid them and their cities. I mean, it was, you talk about prejudice and racism, it was that at its ugliest. Yet verse 4 says Jesus had to go through there. Now the question would be why? Well, because there was someone there that Jesus had to speak with. So that brings up the first thing I want you to consider today. Number one, Jesus will go to any lengths to love. And again, this story, this is interesting because Jesus arrived at noon. So here he is sitting at this well in the heat of the day at a time when usually no one would be around. Because how many of you know you don't go fetch water, especially if you have to walk a distance for it in the heat of the day? In fact, in this culture, they usually waited until sundown in the cool of the evening, unless you didn't want to be seen, unless you didn't want to walk up and hear the huddles of whispers fall silent, because this well also served a dual purpose. It was also for relationship building. It was also for fellowship. Remember, in this day, no Starbucks, no restaurants, no social media. There was just a well. You've heard of a one-horse town? This was it. Only it's a well, not a horse. Hey, y'all got a Starbucks? No, got a well. It was that kind of a deal. So people would go to get water, but they would also talk with each other. They would share community events. They would even gossip a little bit. And as we shall see in a moment, this woman had a questionable moral past. She had a bad reputation in the town of Sychar here. And because of that, she's been the topic of many a conversation at the well. That's why she waits until the time of day when she was sure no one would be there. However, lo and behold, Jesus surprises her. Look in verse 7 of John chapter 4. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Now, I love this about Jesus, and I'm sure you do too. He breaks all kinds of rules here. First of all, He sent His disciples into town to buy food they weren't supposed to eat. Jews often said in this day it would be better to eat swine's flesh than let Samaritan food touch your lips. So you know these guys had to be shaking their heads like, what the heck are we doing? Why do we come to this place again? And then you have this Jewish rabbi speaking to a woman. This was strictly forbidden for Jewish rabbis. I mean, it was a huge no-no. In fact, some of the most legalistic Pharisees earned a very unusual nickname because of their fear of lusting after a woman. What happened with them is if they saw a woman in public and they were walking toward her, they would immediately look down, but they would keep walking. So consequently, they would bump into stuff, bruising themselves and even bleeding. And because of that, they earned the nickname Bleeding Pharisees. You gotta love religion, right? So Jesus looks directly at this woman with complete disregard for his reputation and asking, "Could you give me a drink?" And in the Greek language, the original language of the New Testament, it's even more intimate. He's saying, "Could I drink out of your cup?" Now this was really crazy because it was common for the Jewish people to pack their own dishes when they traveled. So if they had to go to Samaria, they wouldn't take a chance on touching a dish that a Samaritan had eaten out of. Because if you did, you would be rendered ceremonially unclean and unfit to go to the temple, or really unfit to even worship. Yet Jesus asks her, "Could I drink out of your cup?" Now just imagine for a moment being this woman, minding her own business, trying to avoid the stares and the glares and the gossip, and when she raises her eyes, OMG, that is a man. And not only a man, that's a Jewish man. By the way, as an aside, let me say, one of the sad things about life today is that we live in a culture where our reputation is far too important to us, and compassion is far too unimportant. Would you agree? Which is why I think it's vital for us to consistently ask ourselves questions like, well, for instance, with this story, who is my Samaritan? Where is my Samaria? Who do I need to reach out to? Who do I need to have compassion towards? Even if it means throwing a hand grenade onto my own personal reputation. And what a model we have for this in Jesus. I think it's so cool that when no one else would, Jesus takes a risk and He meets one of her most human needs, the need to be cared for. This woman just really needed someone who would talk to her rather than talk about her. Does that make sense? She needed someone who would not refuse her based on her past or her present or her race or her religion or even her lifestyle. Someone who would just keep company with her. Listen, I hope you get this about Jesus. If He is anything at all, He is inclusive. He refuses no one. That means that who you are today at this moment in your life's journey, that's who Jesus wants to meet with. It has nothing to do with how much money you have or don't have. It has nothing to do with what color your skin is or your sexuality or even your politics. So often, people think they have to have it all together, right? Before they could ever approach God, I've got to get it all together. They have to stop certain sin patterns. They have to get their life a little more under control. They have to understand a little bit more about the Bible. They have to hide their past. I want you to listen carefully to me. I don't care who tells you things like that. They are simply not true. The you are right now, that's who Jesus loves, and that's who Jesus wants to spend time with. You, just the way you are. You, warts and all. You, flawed and imperfect. You. That's the you He accepts and desires to spend time with. That's the one He loves. And He will go to any lengths necessary to let you know that. All right, the second thing I want to call your attention to is this. Not only will Jesus go to any lengths to love, He will also go to any lengths to redeem. How many of you realize that Jesus already knows and gets what is in our heart? Like where we struggle, where we hurt. Jesus knows. Look at someone in the room with you right there and say, hey, Jesus knows. Because He does. Like this woman in verse 10. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked Him and He would have given you living water. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock? The woman has to be thinking, who is this guy? And what does he think? He's better than Jacob, that he can somehow just magically bring up water without a rope and a bucket? And Jesus is like, yeah, I actually can. Right? He's Jesus. And verse 13, watch this. Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. And I'm just imagining with a little bit of a sarcastic tone, the woman replies to him in verse 15. Okay, sir, give me the water so I don't get thirsty, so I don't have to keep coming here to draw water, yada, yada, okay. And as she spins on her heels to leave, the total stranger says this to her in verse 16. Hey, go get your husband. Now that stops her dead in her tracks. And no doubt with a lump in her throat and tears forming in her eyes, she turns to him and says in verse 17, I have no husband. And Jesus replied to her, you're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. So what you have said is quite true. You see, everything she was trying to conceal, Jesus already knew. Isn't it funny how we pretend around others and how we pretend around church sometimes when all the while the one who really matters knows all? Interesting. Did you ever hide under the covers as a child and because you're under the cover, you can't see anyone else, you think no one else can see you? You've done that, right? We have a little kitty at home, Gracie, and sometimes she comes into my office and she'll jump up in my lap and need a little TLC. And every so often she'll come into my office and I have a shelving unit next to my chair. And she'll jump up there and on one of the shelves I keep a little polyester, one of those portable drink things where you can put your Cokes in there, and zip it up. And so I leave it up there and the top of it is unzipped. Well, she'll go jump in that thing. Jump on the shelf and get inside it. And then I'll be sitting there and I can see out the corner of my eye, her little head will raise that lid up, it's unzipped. It'll raise it up, her little nose comes out in her eyes and she sits and just stares at me. And I'll look over there and tease with her and say, where's Gracie? Where's my Gracie baby? Where did that kitty go? Playing the game. She thinks I can't see her, but of course I can. It's the same way with this woman, really. Jesus was talking about so much more than water here. He knew what she was really thirsty for, and He knew how she was trying to quench that thirst, even though she didn't. You see, Jesus knows our deepest longing, our deepest thirsts. And not only does He know that, but He promises that if we come to Him to meet our needs, we will never be thirsty again. All right, jump down to verse 25. The woman said, I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. And when He comes, He will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I am the one speaking to you. I am He. Just then His disciples returned, and they were surprised to find Him talking with a woman, but no one asked, what do you want? Or why are you talking with her? Now, think about that. This is pretty funny, actually. Here are the disciples coming up the road from Samaritan's McDonald's or wherever they were, and they're whispering, hey, who's she? I don't know. Why don't you ask him? I'm not going to ask him. You ask him. Oh, I'm not going to ask him. No, you ask him. That kind of a deal. Meanwhile, look what this woman does. When she realizes that this is not just some Jewish rabbi, that it is in fact the long-awaited Messiah Himself. Watch this in verse 28. Then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to town and said to the people, hey, come see a man who told me everything I did. Could this be Messiah? They came out of the town and made their way toward Him. And then verse 39, many of the Samaritans from that town believed in Him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to Him, they urged Jesus to stay with them, and He stayed 2 days. And because of His words, many more became believers. Now don't miss that. Because of His words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world. Now how cool is this scene? When this woman realizes who it is that she's been talking to, man, she left that water jar and hot-footed it back into town. And when she got there, she started telling everyone, hey, listen up, there's hope. Listen up, there's hope, and I found Him. The hope is in this man. He's sitting by the well. Wow. I love this story. That Jesus will go to any lengths to love us, and that He will go to any lengths necessary to redeem us. Oh, by the way, that word redeem is a pretty churchy sounding word to most people. But if you look it up, its meaning, what you find is very insightful. The word means to make something acceptable. It means to restore a reputation. It means to atone for human sin or to buy something back. Now listen, when Jesus went to the cross, He was, among other things, reminding us of the unconditional love and acceptance of His Father. He was reminding us that our reputation was restored. He was reminding us that forgiveness of sin was a done deal. He was reminding us that He bought us back from our guilt and from our shame. Isn't that good? Jesus redeems every life. Yours, your loved ones, your hated ones, it doesn't matter, everyone. Like this woman of Sychar, a woman who did not want to be seen in public 1 minute, now running into her town telling everyone she saw just what happened to her. A woman who had only been known and talked about for having 5 husbands and sleeping around, now became a woman who was talked about as the woman who had met with Messiah, with Jesus Christ. Listen, that's total redemption right there. Amen? By the way, did you catch how this woman who so desperately needed water 1 minute now just all of a sudden sets her jug down and leaves and goes back to town? I believe it's quite intentional by the writer of this story. Think about it. This is what happens when a person meets Jesus face to face today. Nothing else matters at that moment. Do you remember the time when you met Christ for the first time? Nothing else matters at that moment except for telling someone what's happened to you, telling someone what Jesus has done, and showing someone what Jesus can do. So let me ask you this. Do you find that the older we get, the more the idea of leaving our mark on this world comes up? What kind of difference am I making? Am I making a difference after all? Am I truly leaving a lasting mark? I can promise you, as I've grown older, those kinds of questions continue to come to me. I'll close with a story you've got to hear. This is a funny story about an older man who was talking with his grandson. And he said to him, "All right, young man, I will tell you a secret if you promise not to tell your mom and not to tell your dad. Is it a deal?" The little boy said, "It's a deal." So the little boy listened to his grandpa with wide eyes and wide-eyed wonder as his grandpa continued. "Okay, here's what's happening, son. If you want to live a long, long life, here's what you do. This is my secret. Every morning, you sprinkle a little bit of gunpowder on your cereal." Now, Grandpa was just kidding, but guess what? The grandson took him seriously. And wouldn't you know, that little boy grew up to live to be 105 years old. And when he died, he left 12 children, 29 grandchildren, 47 great-grandchildren, and a 15-foot hole in the side of the crematorium. Now, I know that's crazy. That's one way to leave a mark, I suppose. But how many of you know there's a better way? And here it is. There is no greater difference you can make, no greater mark you can leave than pouring the living water of Jesus you have received into someone else. Because that's a difference and a mark that lasts forever. You say, "Well, Pastor, how do I do that?" Here's a great place to start. And seriously, it's not that hard. For instance, you might start out by just helping a neighbor. How about mowing a lawn? How about making a grocery run for someone who cannot get out, especially right now? Maybe just write a note, an old-fashioned snail mail to encourage someone, or send an email to encourage someone, or send some flowers. Or, you know what, just be so bold as to just tell someone what Jesus has done for you and what He can do for them. Or, hey, here's a challenge for you. Let me give you this for your weekly challenge. Give away smiles this week. Now think this through. I wear a mask when I'm out. And when I get into the checkout line, or when I'm checking out with the cashier, let's say at the grocery store, before I walk away, I always point at my mask and say, "You can't really tell, but I'm giving away smiles today, and someone, God knows someone, needs to." And most every time the person, and they have their mask on too at the store, almost every time the person will respond back to me, "Hey, I'm smiling too." And out of that, wouldn't you know, there have already been a few times where the conversation with me has moved on to deeper things about Jesus and His love for us. Isn't that good? Very simple, easy way to start. Like this woman at the well. She comes to Jesus, she drinks His living water, she goes and shows and tells the others. What a great biblical pattern for each of us to follow this week and really every week. So, my admonition is give it a try. You'll be glad you did, and so will those around you. All right, that's it for today. I hope it was a good word for you, an encouraging word. Contemplate on it a little bit this afternoon. Look for ways, take the challenge, look for ways to share the love of God with other people. Do it simply, start off simply, and you'll be rewarded. You'll see, and so will those that you share with. So I hope you have a blessed day today, the rest of the day, and a blessed week this week, and God willing, we'll meet together next week, the same time and the same place, okay? All right, for now, see you soon. Bye-bye.